Hello everyone, good afternoon. In this video, I will be talking about two things only, okay? The first one is about tone, and the second one is about certain elements that will help us criticize the work before we eventually go to presenting our criticism. And in addition to that, after watching this video, I want you to also read one short story that I will post on Microsoft Teams that I hope you can read today, and we can use it tomorrow for our example in the class before you embark on presenting your criticism. Right, as usual, now let me share with you what I have prepared here. So I'm calling this presentation or lecture the critical stance of fiction. Why do I call it so? It's because the most important part of this section will be about how we can see the position of the work and how we criticize that. By criticizing here means how we place ourselves in position or in relation to the work. Do we believe the work? Do we support the work? Do we disagree with the work, or do we want to attack the work? So that's what we will be talking about as well here. Now, before going there, let me review a little bit of what you have done so far in this unit. We started with summarizing the short story or short stories that we read. How do we summarize? We summarize by asking lexical questions or logical questions in order for us to be able to know exactly what the work offers to us. And after asking logical questions and lexical questions, questions about the words and questions about the relation between one element to the other, we also need to ask elaborative questions, which also include evaluative questions. The elaborative questions make us relate what we read with information from outside. From the short story, we might get a little bit, okay? We might only get a description of somebody buying the clone of Taylor Swift. But with information from outside the short story, which is about the objectification of women and the disappearance of privacy amongst famous people or celebrities, then we can say that the short story is not only about buying the clones of Taylor Swift, but it's about objectifying famous people or especially women. That's what we also did. If we ask elaborative questions and including evaluative questions. And we only can do that by knowing the elements of prose, including the plot, the settings, and the characterization. Now, what I also mentioned to you last week or 2 weeks ago, but never really got into the details, was tone. This is the first thing that I will be lecturing on in this video. And the second thing that I will be lecturing on is a combination of three things. The first thing is the context of creation, when the writer wrote the work, and the context of the consumption, when the work was published, where it was published, what language it was published in, and the audience that the work addressed when it was published for the first time or now. And the third thing here is the purpose of this short story. We're talking here about the purpose of the short story. Again, not the purpose of the writer. We don't really actually know what the writer's intention was when he wrote the work. But we know the purpose of the story by knowing these elements and inferring the theme. Okay. And with a combination of all this, we can make up our argument about the work And it is also our opinion about the work. That's what I want you to be able to do at the end of this unit. All right, now, as I promised to you, what we will be discussing first is this one, tone. After tone, we will be talking about the combination of these three things. Right, now, what is tone? Tone is the attitude of the writer towards a subject or the audience. This is related to the work as created by the writer. And the second meaning of tone is the manner with which the writer approaches the theme. How does the writer approach this theme? Does the writer approach it humorously? Does the writer approach it seriously? Does the writer want to use the tone of horror, and so on and so forth? Okay, there are certain elements of tone which we can use later on. And the term tone is quite similar to the term atmosphere. I believe you are also familiar with the term atmosphere in reading stories. The tone is related to the work, okay? It's related to the work. It's about how the work approaches a theme or how the work approaches a subject. But atmosphere is different. It's closer to us readers. It is what we feel when we read a short story or a novel or a poem. Now, when we talk about tone, as I mentioned to you, it's closer to the work. It's the attitude of the work towards something. But if we talk about atmosphere, it's what we feel caused by the use of tone in the story. So tone is closer to the work, and atmosphere is closer to us, the reader. Now, how do we know the tone? And what are the examples of tones? We will go there soon. But here, I want to show you one of the simplest ways to infer the tone of a work. We can infer the tone of a work from at least three elements: the choice of words, the use of words by the writers. If the writer uses words that are related to, for example, darkness and fear or blood or ghost, then we can say that the tone is maybe scary. Okay. If the writer uses casual words, we uses colloquial words, slangs, and sometimes incorrect grammar, we can say that the tone can be casual or carefree or laid back. That's from one. You can see the tone by the choice of words used by the writer. And the second thing we can do to infer tone is by looking at the points of view. What point of view does the writer of the story uses makes us, gives a different tone. The use of first person point of view will create or involves the tone of intimacy, closeness, or well, friendly. Okay, the tone can be friendly with the use of first person or intimate. But the use of, say, a third person point of view, it can create a more neutral tone. Third person point of view can be from what we know as the omniscient or the eye of God. If the writer uses that, then the work will have a more neutral tone. And the next thing that we can use to infer tone is the sentence structure. If the writer uses a formal sentence structure, then we can get the formal tone or serious tone. If the writer uses well, maybe non-grammatical or colloquial, or maybe sentence structures that are common only in certain dialects, then the tone that we get from the work is more either carefree, laid back, or even cynical, probably. Well, we don't actually know. We can only know the tone after, as at least combining these three elements. We find these three elements in the work, and then we try to guess whether we try to infer whether the tone is scary, serious, fun, or laid back, carefree, and so on. These are examples of tones. Tones are usually presented in adjectives. It can be informal, optimistic, sarcastic, cynical, sad, happy, and so on. And let me emphasize once again, we can only know the tone by trying to figure out what choice of words used by the writer, what sentence structure is found there, and also we can see the tone from the use of, what was it again? Sentence structure, choice of words, and points of view. Okay. Next, let me continue with more tones, more what? More examples of tones: light, playful, joyous, lyrical, elegiac, solemn, somber, poignant. When we deal with poetry, we will definitely be able to find more variety of tones, because poetry tends to be more subtle in expressing emotion. Sometimes the emotion that the writer wants to present is clear, but sometimes the emotions are very subtle. Okay, now let me show you just one example of a poem that we can read and try to learn the tone of. Here, this is a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, an American poet. This time, she wrote about things that happened back before the World War II. Now, read this. We Real Cool, We Real Cool is the title of the work. And at the beginning of the work, there is this short description about the pool players, 7 at the Golden Shuffle. We're real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sing sin. We thin gin. We, hold on, I can't see it. Jazz tune. And we die soon. Now, what tone do you get from this poem? As I mentioned to you, you try to get the tone of a work by looking at the choice of words, the points of view in the case of prose, and also uh, the sentence structure. Here, from the words used, we can see that this writer uses words related to what? Nightlife, such as gin, or strike, straight. This is related to playing pool, and that's usually what we do at night. And then sing sin. I don't know, sing sin here is often related to jazz music, probably, and thin gin, the drinks, and jazz tune, and so on. So from here alone, we can see that, okay, this poem is related to nightlife, as mentioned in the information, the pool players, related to people playing pool at night. And there is a final message here about dying soon. Hold on a second, okay? Yeah, that's what we can find from the word choice. It's related to the life of pool players, nightlife, and when we talk about nightlife, it's something laid back, something casual, and but at the end there's this word, there's this line, "We die soon," which has some kind of um, looming threat behind it. Okay, it's casual, but it's not that okay. Okay, you know, when you spend night all the time in a bar like this, playing pool and um, drinking gin, then you know this is not going to end very well. And the second thing that we can look at, we can use to infer the tone of this poem is by using the sentence structure. What do you think is the sentence like? Here, we're real cool. You know, if you learn grammar one or grammar two, you know that this is not grammatically correct, right? We can only say we are really cool. But if you go out there in, I don't know, in Chicago probably, and you hang out with certain groups of people, probably here African American, as we know that Gwendolyn Brooks is an African American writer, then this is the common language that people use over there. We real cool. We left school. We lurk late. We strike straight. We sin, we think gin, and so on. The sentence from the first line, we know that the sentence structure is more casual. We know further when we find, for example, we thin gin. I don't know whether we drink thin gin here, or it can also be we thin our gin with, I don't know, water or something to make it thinner. We just tune. These are not very common, I would say, not very grammatically correct sentence structure. But we cannot say that the English is incorrect. Well, this is the English that some people use. So it's okay. But we get the impression that it is casual in the use of sentence structure. So we can say that the tone of this poem is, yeah, casual. The sentence structure is confirmed or is supported by the use of words. It's casual, but at the end, there's something hanging here. We just tune, we die soon. Casual, but somewhat threatening. There is something casual, but not very okay. So that's the use of tone in poetry. In short stories, we can also do the same thing. You remember our short story, Cemetery Path, the one that I shared with you weeks ago? Now, here's the story. It's about Ivan or Ivan. Ivan was a timid little man, so timid that the villagers called him Pigeon. So it opens with using the words timid and then pigeon, or mocked with the title Ivan the Terrible. Terrible. Terrible in a negative um, connotation of the word. And later on, we also find words like this used by some characters. So we can say that the story here is not really okay with Ivan. The way the story looks at Ivan, the tone that the story uses to refer to Ivan is not really positive, okay? Timid, pigeon, and later on, these words also come up over and over. And the story here, from the word choice, we can say that the story has a tone that is not very positive towards Ivan. And when it comes to the point of view, this one is using a third person point of view. It tends to be distanced. It tends to have some kind of neutrality or even coldness towards Ivan. The story is not really positive towards Ivan. And when we talk about the sentence structure, I don't see anything particular about the sentence structure. So we can say that the tone from the first paragraph only, we can say that the tone is more towards cold, towards even, or neutral, at least neutral, at most cold. Now we can see the tone later on as we see the entire story and find the theme of the story. And what do you think is the theme of this story? I don't know. Some people have different opinions about this, but from my reading, this short story wants to show us that fear or timidity can kill somebody. It's not a disaster or a criminal that can kill a person, but this person's timidity or frightfulness can kill that person, especially if you live in a place like this one is Russia, okay? A place in Russia like this, a cold place with hard people as described here with the examples of soldiers. This place is is no place for timid people, just like the movie, no place for no country for old men. Yeah. So the theme of the story, in my opinion, is fear, frightfulness can kill a person, or timidity can kill a person. And that one is supported by the tone of coldness towards Ivan. The story doesn't really, I would say, doesn't really like Ivan, although Ivan here is the main character of the story. That's from my reading. Okay. Now let's go back to the presentation, guys. Here. Now, after trying to apply theme tone, after trying to infer tone, we go further with more critical stance. And how do we approach a work critically? Now, there are several things that we can use here. And as I mentioned to you, it will be a combination of the context of the production of the story and the context of the consumption of the story and the purpose of the story. And to do that, we can try to find these things. The character's attitude. Now, when we talk about the character's attitude, it means the attitude of people in the story, okay? Not the attitude of the writer, not the attitude of the story. If we use Ivan as the example, we can say that the attitude of Ivan is timid, okay? All right, now we're talking about the attitude of the character. If we use Ivan, the attitude of Ivan is frightful. And the attitude of soldiers around Ivan, they are, well, dismissive towards Ivan. They are derisive and they like to intimidate Ivan. They are intimidated. And that is part of characterization. By knowing the attitude of each character, you know the characterization of these people, these humans or animals or figures that inhabit the story. Now, the second thing is the story's attitude, okay? The attitude of the story is different from the attitude of the character. The attitude of the story is closer to tone, because I mentioned to you that tone is the way with which the writer approaches the story or the way the story presents the characters. Now, what do you think is the attitude of the story? If you have read Ivan or The Cemetery Path, you know that the attitude of the story is quite cynical towards frightful people or quite dismissive towards people who are afraid, especially if they live in a hard place like described in this short story. Or if we want to use a previous example, the popular mechanic, we know that the character of the attitude of the story is quite cynical towards couples who prefer to fight and don't care about their children. Okay, that is the attitude of the story, and it is part of the theme. Okay, by knowing the attitude of the story towards certain things, then we know the theme of this story. Now, the example is, as I mentioned to you, from the short story Popular Mechanic, we can find that the story is cynical towards couples that prefer fighting than taking care of their children. All right. So now we know the attitude of the character and the attitude of the story. The attitude of the character only represents individual characters, but the attitude of the story represents the entire story. And this is part of the theme. It's much bigger than characterization. That's an example from the Popular Mechanic, right? Now, after knowing this, okay, we try to go beyond by asking, so what do you think is the purpose of this story? Why is this story, what does this story want to do with us? That's one thing that you can always try to ask. And it is not always stated in the text. Sometimes, okay, sometimes it's stated in the text, but we cannot really trust that, okay? So we can only know the purpose of the story with a combination of story and the context of production and the context of consumption. This is related to why the story was written. Again, we cannot really have a positive answer to this because we cannot ask the writer. The writer might be dead, or the writer might not really remember, or might not really want to tell us exactly what the purpose was. We can only read this through, well, through stories like this, through elements of the story, through the tone, through the time it was published, and through what magazine or newspaper it was published and who read the story. Hold on a second, let me give you one more bit. Okay. Okay, here we are again in, I'm sorry for the short interruption earlier. So now we're talking about the purpose of the story, right? We only know the purpose of the story by knowing the content of the story first, of course, from the summary, the elements, and also from knowing the context of the production. In the case of Cemetery Path, what we can try to understand is that the story is written by Leonard Q. Ross, and Leonard Q. Ross is an American writer, and some people know him as humorist, who, first of all, emigrated from Poland. Back then, it was part of the Russian Empire, to the United States. And then he grew up in the United States. And he came from a Jewish family there. And then he lived in the United States and making humorous stories. He published most of his stories in the 40s and 50s. So that's the context of the production. We know that this is written by somebody who emigrated from Russia. So he has some kind of connection with Russia, although not very close, okay? So from this, we can say that, yeah, maybe he is somebody who knows Russia a little bit, but not really close as seeing it from the perspective of someone who has stayed in Russia for a long time. And the next thing that we also need to see is the production, the context of consumption. The story was written for American people who didn't know Russia, and probably they knew Russia as only the enemy of the United States, in the sense of the race for world domination at the time. So when it was published back then, it was not for really understanding the culture of Russia. It was more like an exploration of human's personal situation. It has nothing to do with knowing Russia as a place. It was not meant to educate people about life in Russia. That's what we can get. So, what is the purpose then? Well, again, we cannot be very sure about the purpose of the story, but at least it was mostly, it can be for entertainment, or it can be not about educating people about Russia, not about telling people what Russia is, but there's also another possibility. It's probably one way to create some kind of idea about Russia by the writer. And we might, well, we can relate this to the fact that Russia was the enemy of the United States. So if somebody is very loyal to the United States, especially somebody like Ross, who has emigrated to the United States, because life for Jewish people was not always easy in Russia. There were even a lot of episodes in history where Jewish people were persecuted in Russia, and United States has always been very open to Jewish immigrants. So yeah, we can assume that this story has this story has some kind of grudge against Russia and somewhat love or patriotism towards the United States. So there is also a possibility that the story is an attempt to describe Russia as, or to show that Russia is not a, well, not a very, very nice place, especially if you are a weak person, like in the story of Cemetery Path, like what is his name? Ivan. Okay. For Ivan, who is afraid, who is weak, Russia is not a good place. He is not wrong at all in the story, but at the end, he dies. He dies because of what? Because of his fear. And why does he have to die because of his fear? Because people around him intimidates him. So that's how we can make connection between the story and the purpose of the story. The story, as we know, is about a man who is afraid, who keeps getting intimidated by others, but then he tries to show his bravery by crossing the cemetery. Unfortunately, his fear is so strong that he becomes very afraid, frightened in the middle of the cemetery, and he dies there. That's the story. And the purpose is, it's either to entertain. Second one is either to, the second one is not to educate people about the social condition of Russia. And the third one is probably to show people that, or to give the impression that Russia is not a welcoming place for those who are weak. So that's the purpose of the story if we want to analyze Cemetery Path. All right. I guess that's all for now, everyone. As I mentioned to you here, it's related to the background of the short story, and uh, it is also probably related to our situation today. I mean, knowing the purpose or inferring the purpose of a story will also make us somewhat guess or know whether the story is still meaningful today or not. All right, I think that's all, everyone, that I can tell you about. The first one is about the tone. Tone is one way to get a deeper meaning of a story by finding the word choice, by seeing the points of view, and by seeing the sentence structure. The second thing that I also discussed today is a combination of the context of the story that we can know by finding information about the writer and when he or she wrote the story. And we also get information about that. Sorry, we can also build our critical stance by looking at the context of consumption when the story was published and where it was published. And the third one is combining it to know the purpose of this story. What is the story for? And why was it written? And what was the background of the story, like I mentioned to you earlier, and whether it is still meaningful today. Well, that's all, everyone. I hope with this you can try to do the same with the short story that I will now give you on Microsoft Teams. Right, I think that's all, everyone. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye.